The council chamber floated in the darkness of space. A massive ring of metal and light orbiting the neutral world of Axios Prime. Inside, representatives from more than 200 alien species gathered in curved rows that rose toward the domed ceiling. The air hummed with translation devices, turning thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. President Daehyun sat in Earth's designated seat, his hands folded calmly on the armrests. He was 54 years old, with gray hair at his temples and eyes that had seen too many battles in his youth. Next to him stood Ambassador Ji-won, a younger woman with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. She held a datapad filled with documents, treaties, and evidence they had prepared for months. The chamber fell silent as Councillor Thexva rose from his seat. He was a Vraxian, tall and covered in dark green scales that caught the light. His yellow eyes swept across the assembly with obvious contempt. Behind him, 5 other species nodded in agreement. They had formed an alliance specifically for this moment. Members of the Galactic Union, Thexva began, his voice deep and commanding. We gather today to address a threat to our collective peace. The humans have violated 17 treaties in their expansion into contested space. They have ignored our warnings. They have taken systems that do not belong to them. Ambassador Ji-won stood quickly. That's not true. We have documentation showing— Silence, Thexva interrupted, not even looking at her. The time for human excuses has passed. We have evidence of your aggression. A holographic display appeared above the chamber floor. It showed human ships near a disputed asteroid belt, then images of mining operations, and finally what appeared to be military installations. The images were misleading, carefully edited to make peaceful colonies look like invasion forces. Ji-won recognized the manipulation immediately, but before she could speak, other council members began whispering among themselves. President Daehyun watched silently. He had expected this. The Vraxian Imperium had been working for years to turn the Council against humanity. They saw humans as newcomers, as primitives who had reached the stars too quickly and now dared to compete with established powers. The evidence is clear, announced another counselor. A crystalline being from the Axiom Collective. Humanity has overstepped its bounds. Ji-won tried again. If the Council would examine our survey reports, you'll see those systems were unclaimed when we arrived. We followed every protocol. We registered our colonies properly. The Vraxians are simply angry that we found valuable resources first. Several council members nodded at her words, but not enough. Thexva had spent years building his coalition, promising favors, making deals. The vote was decided before the session even began. The Galactic Council has reached a decision, the Supreme Arbiter announced from the highest seat. The old being looked tired, as if he knew this was wrong but felt powerless to stop it. Humanity must withdraw from 40% of its colonial holdings within 30 standard days. This includes the systems of New Bizin, Terra Nova, Prosperity Station, and 15 others. The populations must be evacuated. The infrastructure must be abandoned. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species protested the harsh terms. Others celebrated. Ji-won's face went pale. That's 8 million people, she said quietly. We can't possibly evacuate that many civilians in 30 days. The logistics alone. Then you should have thought of that before your illegal expansion, Thexva said. His mouth curved into something like a smile, showing sharp teeth. Perhaps this will teach your species some humility. You are not special. You are not superior. You are clever animals playing at civilization, and it's time you learned your place. President Daehyun stood slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. He had been quiet throughout the entire proceedings, letting Ji-won handle the diplomatic responses. But now he stepped forward to the railing, looking down at Thexva far below. We reject these terms, Daehyun said simply. The chamber went absolutely silent. Thexva laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. You reject them? You have no choice, human. If you do not comply, the Council will authorize corrective action. My fleet alone outnumbers your entire navy by 20 to 1. This is not a negotiation. This is us being merciful enough to give you time to run away. I see, Daehyun said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Then let me be clear in return. Those colonies are home to millions of human families. Children have been born there. People have built lives there. We will not abandon them because you manufactured a political excuse to steal our territory. Then you choose war, Lexva said, still smiling. How very primitive. How very human. Ambassador Ji-won touched Daehyun's arm. Mr. President, perhaps we should request more time to— No, Daehyun said quietly. He looked at her with something like sadness. Ji-won, you're a good diplomat. You believe in the power of words, of reason, of finding common ground. I believe that too, once. But look around this chamber. The decision was made before we arrived. They don't want compromise. They want submission. He turned back to face Vexva and the assembled council. You think we're primitives. You think we're weak because we're new to the galaxy. You think we'll run away when threatened by superior numbers. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. You're about to learn why that's a mistake. Brave words from a dead man, Vexva said. I look forward to watching your fleet burn. President Daehyun didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, Ji-won hurrying after him. As they left the chamber, she could hear the council members already discussing how to divide up the soon-to-be abandoned human territories on the transport back to Earth. Ji-won finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. What are you planning? Daehyun looked out at the stars rushing past. For 47 years we've been the newcomers, the junior members. We followed every rule, accepted every slight, swallowed our pride over and over. We did this because we hoped diplomacy would work. Because we wanted peace. He turned to look at her. But some species only understand one language. He activated his secure communication device. After a moment, a woman's face appeared on the screen. Admiral Hannah, commander of Earth's Deep Space Fleet. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Admiral, Daehyun said. Activate Protocol Warhammer. Hannah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Satisfaction, perhaps? Or relief? Confirmed, Mr. President, no more talking? No more talking, Daehyun agreed. They want a war? Let's give them one they'll never forget. The command center deep beneath Earth's surface buzzed with activity. Dozens of officers moved between holographic displays showing every human colony in contested space. Admiral Hannah stood at the center of it all, her eyes scanning multiple data streams simultaneously. She had been waiting for this moment for 5 years. Status report, she said calmly. A young officer looked up from his console. All fleet elements are moving into position. The Vraxians think we're preparing evacuation transports. They have no idea we're reinforcing instead. Hannah allowed herself a small smile. Protocol Warhammer had been her idea, developed quietly over years of preparation. While Earth's diplomats talked peace at the council, the military had been preparing for war. Not because they wanted it, but because they understood something the aliens didn't. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. Captain Minho. Report, Hannah said into her communicator. Thousands of kilometers away. Aboard the stealth destroyer Silent Knife. Captain Minho sat in his darkened command chair. His ship was invisible to most sensors, hiding in the shadow of a dead moon near Vraxian space. Around him, his crew worked in near silence, monitoring enemy communications and fleet movements. We've completed reconnaissance of their forward positions, Minho replied. Sending data now. They're not even trying to hide their deployments. They expect us to run? The data appeared on Hannah's screens. The Vraxian fleet was massive, just as Vexva had boasted. Hundreds of ships, each one powerful and well-armed. By any conventional calculation, humanity was hopelessly outmatched. Good, Hannah said. Arrogance makes them predictable. Continue monitoring. I want to know the moment they start moving. In another part of the facility, Dr. Yuno worked in a laboratory that officially didn't exist. Project Prometheus had been humanity's secret weapon research program, hidden even from most of Earth's government. The Council had rules about certain types of weapons, treaties that limited military technology. Humanity had signed those treaties and followed them publicly. But privately they had asked a simple question: what if diplomacy fails? "Admiral, Prometheus packages are ready for deployment," Una reported through a secure channel. She was in her late 30s, brilliant and intense, with the kind of focus that made her forget to sleep when she was working on a problem. "We can have them in position within 12 hours. "Do it," Hannah replied. "All of them." Across human space, the massive evacuation that everyone expected to see began. Transport ships departed from colonies, filled with civilians. News broadcasts showed families tearfully leaving their homes. The Galactic Council watched with satisfaction. Even some sympathetic species felt relieved that the humans had seen sense and chosen survival over pride, but they weren't looking closely enough. For every transport that left a colony, 2 supply ships arrived. Hidden among legitimate cargo containers were weapon platforms, ammunition, and the components of weapon systems that would have made the Council extremely nervous. The evacuations were real, but only for those who wanted to leave. The majority of colonists chose to stay and fight. General Taesung coordinated the colony defenses from New Bizan, the largest and most important of the contested settlements. He was older than Hannah, a veteran of the Earth Wars before humanity reached the stars. He understood urban combat, guerrilla tactics, and how to make an enemy pay for every meter of ground. "They think we'll be easy targets," Taesung told his officers as they reviewed defensive positions. "They think because they have bigger ships and more advanced plasma weapons that they've already won? Let them think that. We'll teach them what humans do best: adapt and survive." The days counted down. 29 days, 28. The Galactic Council watched and waited. HFY gave interviews to news services across the galaxy boasting about Vraxian military superiority. He called humans interesting primitives who had momentarily forgotten their place in the natural order. Other species began placing bets on how quickly the war would end. Most gave humanity less than a week once fighting started. A few sympathetic voices argued that humans might last a month if they were lucky. No one, not even humanity's few friends, believed they could actually win on Earth. President Daehyun addressed the planet. His speech was broadcast to every human colony, every ship in space, every settlement on the frontier. "My fellow humans," he began. "In 3 days, the Council's deadline expires. The Vraxian Imperium expects us to run. The galaxy expects us to surrender. They think because we're young, because we're new to the stars, that we'll back down when threatened." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around the solar system, in habitats and colonies and ships, millions of people stopped what they were doing to watch. "They're wrong," Daehyun continued. "We didn't crawl out of caves, cross oceans, and reach the stars by running away when things got difficult. We didn't build everything we have by surrendering when someone bigger came along. Yes, they outnumber us. Yes, they have more ships, more weapons, more experience. But they've never fought anyone like us." In the command center, Admiral Hannah listened to the speech while reviewing tactical data. Captain Minho heard it aboard Silent Knife while watching Vraxian fleet movements. Dr. Yuna heard it while making final checks on her weapons systems. General Taesung heard it while walking through New Bisan's streets, looking at the faces of people who had chosen to stay and defend their home. "They want our colonies?" Daehyun said. "They want our resources? They want us to bow our heads and accept that we're inferior?" His voice hardened. "Then let them come and take it. Let them try. They'll learn something today. Humans don't know how to quit. We don't know how to give up. And we definitely don't know how to surrender." The speech ended. For a moment there was silence across human space. Then slowly a sound began. It started in homes and streets and ships, cheering, not celebration, but determination. The sound of millions of people deciding that they would rather fight and die than live on their knees. On the 29th day, President Daehyun made one final broadcast. This one went to the entire galaxy, not just humanity. It was simple and direct. This is President Dahayan of Earth to the Galactic Council and the Vraxian Imperium. We reject your ultimatum. These colonies are our homes. The people living there are under our protection. If you want them, come and take them. We'll be waiting. In the council chamber, Nexva watched the broadcast with amusement. Brave words, he said to his allies. But words mean nothing. Send the fleet? Let's end this quickly. The Vraxian War fleet began moving toward New Bizan, 400 ships, the largest military force assembled in decades. They moved confidently, certain of their overwhelming superiority. Behind them came troop transports, ready to occupy the colonies once resistance collapsed. In Earth's command center, alarms began sounding. Enemy fleet detected, an officer reported. They're heading for New Bizan, just as we predicted. Admiral Hanna walked to the main display, studying the enemy formation. They weren't even trying to hide their approach. Why would they? They believed this would be a massacre? Admiral orders? An officer asked. Hanna smiled, cold and dangerous. Send a message to all defensive positions. 2 words, let them come. The Vraxian war fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Bizan system. 400 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of the system's star. On the flagship Domination, Warlord Krathax studied the tactical display with satisfaction. Scan for human defenses, he ordered. Krathax had fought in 50 battles across his long career. He had never lost. This would be his easiest victory yet. We detect only 20 human vessels, his tactical officer reported. Defensive satellites around the planet and moons. No significant military presence. Krathax's scaled face showed what might have been a smile. 20 ships against 400. This isn't a battle. It's an execution. Open a communication channel to the human colony. On New Bizan's surface, Colonel Haiyan Wu stood in the command bunker watching the same tactical display. He was 46 years old, scarred from a dozen conflicts, and completely unafraid. Around him, his officers prepared for what was coming. The communication came through. Krathax's face appeared on the main screen, his yellow eyes gleaming with confidence. Human Commander, I am Warlord Krathax of the Vraxian Imperium. You have one chance to surrender. Order your civilians to prepare for transport. If you comply, we will allow you to leave peacefully. If you resist, we will destroy every ship and bombard your planet until nothing lives. Han Wu looked at the display for a long moment. Then he reached out and cut the communication without saying a single word. On the Domination, Krathax stared at the blank screen in disbelief. Did that primitive just hang up on me? Yes, Warlord, his tactical officer confirmed. Then they choose death, Krathax growled. All ships, attack formation. Destroy the defending fleet first, then begin orbital bombardment. Show these humans what real power looks like. The Vraxian fleet advanced, moving with practiced precision. Their plasma cannons charged, ready to tear through the small human defense force. It should have been over in minutes. That's when everything went wrong for them. The first indication of trouble came when half of Krathax's Vanguard simply exploded. No warning. No incoming fire detected. Just sudden, catastrophic destruction as tungsten rods moving at near-light speed punched through their shields and hulls like they were paper. Report. Krathax shouted. Railgun satellites. Hidden throughout the system. They're using kinetic weapons, not energy. The tactical officer's voice was panicked. Our shields aren't calibrated for this type of attack. More ships died. Dr. Yuna's Prometheus platforms had been seeded throughout the system, disguised as debris and inactive satellites. Now they revealed themselves, launching solid projectiles that carried tremendous kinetic energy. The Vraxians had built their defenses around stopping plasma and laser weapons. Simple kinetic kills had been considered primitive, obsolete technology. Until now. Adjust shields, Krathax ordered. Target those platforms. But the platforms were small, numerous, and spread across millions of kilometers. While the Vraxians tried to target them, the human ships attacked. All 20 of them launched forward at speeds that seemed impossible. Lieutenant Sora led Ghost Squadron from the cockpit of her fighter. She was 28 years old and had been flying since she was 16. Her squadron of 12 ships appeared on Vraxian sensors, then vanished, then reappeared somewhere else entirely. "They can't see us properly," Sora reported to her pilots. "Their sensors aren't designed for our stealth technology. Attack pattern Delta. Hit them where they're not looking." The Ghost Squadron struck like invisible knives. They targeted command ships, sensor arrays, and communication relays. The Vraxians fired at empty space while human fighters destroyed critical systems from angles that should have been impossible. Captain Minho brought the silent knife in close to the Vraxian flagship. His ship was designed for exactly this kind of operation: silent, invisible, deadly. He launched cyber warfare packages directly into the domination systems. "Package delivered," he reported to Admiral Hanna, who was coordinating from Earth, deploying viral code now. On the domination, screens began flickering. Systems started failing. The Vraxian computer network, which had controlled their fleet for centuries, suddenly found itself fighting a very different kind of war. Human artificial intelligence didn't just attack their systems. It learned them, adapted to them, and turned them against themselves. "We're losing coordination," Krathax's tactical officer reported. "Ships are receiving conflicting orders. The network is compromised." Krathax couldn't believe what was happening. In 15 minutes of combat, he had lost a third of his fleet. The humans weren't fighting fair. They were using primitive kinetic weapons, stealth technology that broke every rule of proper combat, and cyber attacks that shouldn't have been possible. "All ships, break formation," he ordered. "Independent action. Show these primitives what Vraxian warriors can do in single combat." It was exactly the wrong order to give. The moment his fleet broke formation, they became vulnerable to the humans' real advantage: creativity. Human ships didn't follow predictable patterns. They used the planet's gravity to slingshot around at unexpected angles. They hid in the shadow of moons and asteroids. They fired, then immediately changed vectors in ways that seemed random but were actually carefully calculated to confuse. Enemy targeting systems. The Vraxians had better shields, stronger weapons, and more experience. But they had learned to fight in a specific way, following specific rules. Humans had learned to fight by whatever method worked. When shields blocked their weapons, they used kinetic kills. When sensors tracked them, they deployed stealth. When ships were too strong to destroy, they hacked their computers. "This is madness," Krathax roared. "They're not fighting properly." His second-in-command looked at him with something like fear. "Warlord, we've lost over half our ships. We need to withdraw." "No." Krathax slammed his fist on his command chair. "We outnumber them. We're superior. We just need to—" The domination shuddered as Lieutenant Sora's fighter squadron hit its engines. Not enough to destroy the massive ship, but enough to cripple it on the planet below. The Vraxians tried orbital bombardment. Plasma bolts fell from the sky, meant to terrorize the civilian population into surrender. But Colonel Haiyan-Wu had prepared for this. Hidden bunkers protected the civilians. The colony's infrastructure was hardened against attack. And when Vraxian dropships attempted to land ground forces, they found something waiting for them: human soldiers who had studied the terrain, prepared ambush points, and learned from centuries of guerrilla warfare. The Vraxian soldiers were strong and well-armed, but they were fighting on human ground by human rules, a Vraxian squad leader reported back to his ship. "We can't find them. They're using the buildings, the terrain, everything against us. They appear, strike, and vanish. This isn't war, it's butchery." Haiyan-Wu listened to the intercepted communication and nodded with grim satisfaction. "That's the idea. Make them afraid. Make them hesitate. Make them realize they're not fighting for resources or territory. They're fighting for survival." In space, the battle reached its conclusion. Of the 400 Vraxian ships that had arrived, fewer than 100 remained combat effective. The human fleet had lost 6 ships and taken damage on most of the others. But they had held Warlord Krathax, his flagship crippled and his fleet in ruins, finally gave the order he never thought he would have to give. All ships retreat. Full withdrawal. As the surviving Vraxian vessels fled the system, the galaxy watched in absolute shock. The broadcast had been transmitted to every major world. What was supposed to be a quick demonstration of Vraxian superiority had turned into a humiliating defeat on New Bison. People emerged from bunkers and shelters. They looked up at the sky where debris from destroyed ships glowed as it fell through the atmosphere. They had survived. They had won. Colonel Hyan Wu addressed his troops. This was just the first battle. They'll come back with more ships, more weapons, more anger. But today we proved something. We proved that humans don't lose just because someone says we should. Admiral Hanna watched the battle reports from Earth's command center. They had won, but the cost had been real. 6 ships destroyed. Hundreds of personnel dead. Thousands wounded. The colony had taken damage that would take months to repair. Madam Admiral, the Galactic Council is requesting an emergency session, an officer reported. Let them wait, Hanna replied. She was already planning the next phase. Because she knew something the galaxy was just beginning to understand. Humanity wasn't going to wait to be attacked again. Prepare Operation Reverse Storm. If they want a war, we'll bring it to them. The Galactic Council chamber was in chaos. Representatives shouted at each other while Councillor Lexva stood alone at his platform, scales darker than usual with what might have been shame or rage. The recording of the Battle of New Bizan played on loop on every news service across the galaxy. The Supreme Arbiter called for order, his ancient voice barely cutting through the noise. The Council will come to order. We must address this situation. Address what? Demanded a counselor from the Axiom Collective. That we authorized what we thought would be a simple occupation and instead witnessed one of the greatest military defeats in modern history? The humans destroyed 2/3 of a Vraxian war fleet. They cheated, Vexva shouted. They used prohibited weapons, illegal tactics. They used kinetic weapons and cyber warfare. Another counselor interrupted, both of which are entirely legal under council law. You assumed they would fight the way you expected them to fight. That assumption cost you 300 ships. President Daehyun's face appeared on the main display. He was broadcasting from Earth, his expression calm but his eyes hard. Members of the Galactic Council, I'm sure you're having a very productive discussion about how we were supposed to lose. Let me save you some time. We're not interested in your debates anymore. You dare? Lexva began. Yes, I dare, Daehyun interrupted. You tried to steal our homes. You sent a fleet to kill our people. You thought we would run away like frightened children. Instead, we fought back. And now, we're not going to wait for you to try again. If you want a war, we'll give you one. But it won't be on your terms. It will be on ours. The transmission ended. The council chamber fell silent. Finally, a small counselor from a peaceful species spoke up. What does he mean on their terms? They found out 12 hours later. Operation Reverse Storm began with simultaneous attacks on 12 different Vrexian military installations. Admiral Hanna had divided Earth's deep space fleet into rapid strike groups, each one targeting a specific objective. The goal wasn't to hold territory. It was to prove that humanity could hit the Vraxians anywhere, anytime. Commodore Jinho led the attack on Krell Sector, a major Vraxian supply depot. His carrier group dropped out of faster-than-light travel, directly on top of the facility, giving the defenders barely minutes to react. Launch all fighters, Jinho ordered calmly. He was 42 years old, quiet and methodical, with a talent for seeing 3 moves ahead of his opponents. Target the fuel storage and ammunition bunkers first. I want this facility crippled, not destroyed. Let them see what happens when their logistics collapse. The attack was brutal and efficient. Human fighters, using the same stealth technology that had proven so effective at New Bizan, struck critical infrastructure while the carrier group's main weapons kept the defending ships busy. Within an hour, Krell Sector was burning. The facility that had supplied Vraxian fleets for 50 years was now useless wreckage. Similar scenes played out across Vraxian territory, a sensor array that monitored an entire sector went dark. A shipyard building new warships took catastrophic damage. A fuel refinery exploded in a fireball visible from orbit. Each attack was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum human casualties, but the real damage wasn't just military. Captain Minho, aboard the Silent Knife, had infiltrated deep into the territory of one of the Vraxians' allied species, the Kelth. They were a species of traders who had sided with the Vraxians because they thought it would be profitable. Beginning data extraction. Minho reported to Admiral Hanna. His ship hung invisible in orbit around the Kelth homeworld, its sensors penetrating their government networks. Uploading now. What they found was exactly what Ambassador Kyung-mi needed. Kyung-mi was different from Ambassador Ji-won. Where Ji-won believed in peace through understanding, Kyung-mi believed in peace through leverage. She was younger, sharper, and had spent years in intelligence before joining the diplomatic corps. The data Minho provided showed everything. Secret communications between HFY and the Kelth leadership. Promises of human territory in exchange for support. Evidence that the Vraxians had manufactured the claims of human aggression. Most importantly, it showed that the Vraxians had lied to their allies about the strength of humanity's military. They told you we would collapse after one battle, Kyung-mi said in a broadcast directly to the Kelth government. They told you this would be easy profit. Now their fleet is broken, their supply lines are burning, and they're losing this war. You can continue supporting them and share their fate, or you can withdraw and we'll forget you were ever involved. Within 24 hours, the Kelth announced they were pulling out of the anti-human coalition. 2 other species followed within the week. The Vraxian alliance was fracturing. HFY tried to hold it together through threats and promises, but the other species had seen what humans could do. They had watched the Battle of New Bizan. They were watching human ships appear deep inside Vraxian space, striking at will. The question they were all asking was simple. If the Vraxians can't defend themselves, how can they defend us? Dr. Yuna's next weapon deployment made the situation even worse for the Vraxians. The Prometheus warheads were delivered to human ships throughout the fleet. They didn't explode in the traditional sense. Instead, they generated massive electromagnetic pulses in a very specific frequency range. The first time they were used, a Vraxian patrol fleet found itself completely helpless. Their plasma weapons, which relied on magnetic containment, simply shut down. Their shields failed, their ships became floating targets. "This is impossible," a Vraxian captain transmitted before his ship was disabled. "Plasma weapons are the pinnacle of military technology. How are you doing this?" The answer was simple. Humans had studied Vraxian technology and found its weakness. Plasma weapons were powerful, but they required extremely precise magnetic fields to function. Disrupt those fields, and the weapons became useless. The Vraxians had built their entire military doctrine around plasma technology. Now that advantage was gone. Admiral Hanna coordinated the offensive from Earth, but she made sure every victory was broadcast across the galaxy. She wanted the other species to see what was happening. Not to gloat, but to make them understand. Humanity wasn't cruel, but they were thorough. They were proving that threatening Earth had consequences. President Dae-hyun addressed the Galactic Council again. This time his message was different. We didn't want this war. We tried diplomacy, we followed your rules. We swallowed our pride. And accepted being treated as inferiors because we hoped reason would prevail. But when you sent a fleet to take our homes by force, you made a choice. Now you're learning something that every species on Earth learned thousands of years ago. We are very, very good at war. He paused, letting that sink in. We've spent the last 2 weeks dismantling Vraxian military infrastructure. We've destroyed supply depots, disabled shipyards, and turned their allies against them. We can continue doing this indefinitely. Or the Council can do what it should have done from the beginning. Recognize that humanity has the same rights as any other species. That our colonies are legitimate. That we won't be bullied or threatened. The response came not from the Council but from the Vraxian High Command. A message transmitted on all frequencies, desperate and angry. The Verfaxian Imperium will not be humiliated by primitive apes. We are deploying the Annihilator. If Earth will not submit, then Earth will be destroyed. The transmission ended. In the command center, Admiral Hannah's expression didn't change, but her officers looked worried. The Annihilator was a legend, a planet-killer weapon that the Vraxians had supposedly built decades ago, but never used. "Confirm the threat," Hannah ordered. Intelligence reports came in quickly. The Annihilator was real. It was massive, built into an asteroid, and powered by the core of a dying star. It could generate a beam powerful enough to shatter a planet's crust, rendering it uninhabitable. And it was being prepared to fire on Earth. President Daehyun looked at the reports and then at Hannah. "Can we stop it?" "Not with conventional weapons," Hannah admitted. "It's too big, too well defended. We'd need to get a strike team inside to sabotage it from within." "Then that's what we'll do," Daehyun said. "Assemble the fleet, all of it. We're going to Vraxis Prime." "Their capital system?" an officer asked. "That's suicide." Daehyun shook his head. "No, it's what we should have done from the start. We've been fighting defensively, showing them we can protect ourselves. Now we show them that if they threaten Earth, we'll bring the war to their doorstep. We're going to destroy the Annihilator, and we're going to do it in a way that makes them never want to fight us again." Admiral Hannah looked at the tactical displays. Every human warship, every carrier, every destroyer and cruiser, they would all be needed for this. It would be the largest space battle in galactic history, fought in the heart of enemy territory. "Send the orders," she said quietly. "All ships converge on Vraxis Prime. We end this war." The human fleet gathered at the edge of Vraxian space like a storm preparing to break. Every warship Earth possessed had answered the call. 300 vessels, from massive carriers to small destroyers, all bearing the blue and white colors of Earth's flag. It was smaller than the Vraxian home fleet, but after weeks of constant warfare, the humans had learned something the Vraxians were still struggling to accept. Numbers alone didn't win battles. "Admiral." Hannah stood on the bridge of the carrier Earth's Vengeance, watching the tactical display. Around her, officers worked with quiet efficiency. They knew what was coming. They knew not all of them would survive. But they also knew that if they failed, Earth itself would die. "All ships report ready," Commodore Jinho said from his station. "Awaiting your orders, Admiral." Hannah looked at the display showing Vraxis Prime, the Vraxian home system. 3 planets, dozens of moons, and hundreds of defense platforms. At the center of it all, protected by the strongest shields and heaviest weapons the Vraxians possessed, sat the Annihilator. The massive weapon looked like a small moon itself, crackling with barely contained energy. "Intelligence suggests they need another 4 hours to charge the weapon to full power," reported a tactical officer. "After that, they can fire on Earth." "Then we have 4 hours to stop them," Hannah said simply. "All ships, execute attack plan Omega. Remember your training. Remember why we're here, for Earth." "For Earth," the fleet responded in unison. The human fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel, emerging directly in the Vraxian home system. Alarms screamed across every Vraxian ship and station. The humans hadn't just come to their territory. They had come to their home, Warlord Krathax, commanding from a new flagship after losing the domination, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "They're insane. They're attacking Vraxis Prime itself." "All defense fleets engage the humans," ordered the Vraxian High Command. "Protect the Annihilator at all costs." The battle began immediately. The Vraxian home fleet was massive, nearly 500 ships, all of them fighting to protect their homeworld. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, plasma bolts and missiles filling space with deadly light, but the humans had learned from every previous battle. They came in using formations that confused enemy targeting. They deployed their kinetic weapons to disable shields before following up with conventional attacks. Most importantly, they fought with a desperate courage that came from knowing their entire world depended on them, Lieutenant. Sora led Ghost Squadron toward the Annihilator. Her mission was simple: disable the weapon's power systems. The problem was getting close enough to do it. Sora, you're reading massive anti-fighter defenses around the target, Captain Minho warned from the silent knife. His ship was trying to provide electronic warfare support, but even he was struggling against the sheer number of Vraxian systems. I know, Sora replied calmly. She was 28 years old and had already survived 3 major battles. Today might be her last, but she would make it count. Ghost Squadron, follow my lead. Attack pattern Omega 7. We only get one chance at this. Her 12 fighters dove toward the Annihilator, weaving through defensive fire that could vaporize them with a single hit. 2 fighters exploded before they got halfway there. 3 more took critical damage and had to break off. That left 7 fighters against the most heavily defended target in the galaxy. On the planet below, Vraxian civilians watched the battle in the sky. They had been told humans were primitives, that this war would be over in days. Instead, they were watching their home fleet fight desperately against an enemy that refused to quit. The main battle was chaos. Ships on both sides exploded in brilliant flashes. Admiral Hannah coordinated the fleet movements with cold precision, but even she couldn't prevent losses. The destroyer Morning Star took a direct hit and broke apart. The cruiser Defiant rammed a Vraxian battleship rather than let it target the carriers. Everywhere, humans were dying to buy time for Sora's squadron. Admiral, we've lost the Steadfast and the Guardian, an officer reported. 20% casualties across the fleet. Hold the line, Hannah ordered. Sora, what's your status? Almost there, Sora replied. Her fighter shook as defensive fire missed her by meters. Just need another minute. A massive explosion rocked her ship. One of the Annihilator's point defense weapons had finally caught her. Her fighter's controls died, life support failing, engine gone. She was drifting helplessly toward the weapon she was supposed to destroy. Sora, Minho's voice came through her dying radio. She looked at her screens. 5 of her squadron were still alive, still fighting toward the target. But they couldn't get through the defenses, not without help. Not without someone drawing fire. Sora made her decision. She switched her fighter to manual control, using the last of her maneuvering thrusters to adjust her trajectory. She wasn't drifting randomly anymore. She was aimed directly at the Annihilator's power core. Ghost Squadron, target my position and fire everything you have, she said calmly. That's an order. But one of her pilots began. Do it, Sora commanded. We don't get second chances. End this war for Earth. The 5 remaining fighters of Ghost Squadron fired every weapon they had at the point where Sora's fighter was about to impact. The combination of their weapons and her fighter's fusion reactor created an explosion that tore through the Annihilator's shields. On the surface of the weapon, Colonel Hyanwu and a team of Marines emerged from the silent knife. Minho had managed to land them during the chaos, using the explosion Sora created as cover. Now they were inside the enemy's ultimate weapon with one job: destroy it from within. Move fast, Hyanwu ordered. They know we're here. The Marines fought through corridors filled with Vraxian soldiers. They used every trick they had learned: grenades, close combat, and pure determination. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were also fighting for the survival of their species. Found the control center, reported one Marine. Setting charges now. Hyanwu covered them, firing at Vraxian reinforcements rushing toward their position. He took a plasma bolt to the shoulder but kept fighting. Beside him, Marines fell, but those who remained never stopped advancing. Charges set, 30 seconds, the demolition expert shouted. Everyone out, Hyanwu ordered. Get to the extraction point. Half his team made it. The other half died holding the position, buying time for their squadmates to escape. The explosion that followed was visible across the entire star system, a miniature sun blooming as the Annihilator's power core destabilized. The weapon that was supposed to destroy Earth instead tore itself apart. The Vraxian fleet, seeing their ultimate weapon destroyed, began to falter. They had thrown everything at the humans and failed. Now, watching Earth's flag still flying amid the wreckage of the battlefield, they understood what they had refused to believe: they were losing. Warlord Krathax, his fleet in ruins around him, finally transmitted the words he never thought he would say. Vraxian fleet, cease fire, we surrender. The Galactic Council, watching the battle from their distant chamber, sat in stunned silence. The humans had done it. They had attacked the enemy home system, destroyed an ultimate weapon, and forced the surrender of an empire that had stood for thousands of years. President Dahion's face appeared on every screen. He looked tired, older than he had at the start of the war. Vraxian High Command, this is President Dahion of Earth. We accept your surrender. Counselor Thexva will be taken into custody to face trial for war crimes. The Vraxian Imperium will withdraw all claims on human territory, and this will serve as a lesson to the entire galaxy. Humanity tried peace. We begged for diplomacy. When that failed, we showed you what we're capable of. Don't make us do this again. The war ended that day. The costs were counted in the weeks that followed. Earth had lost 90 ships. 5,000 military personnel had died, including Lieutenant Sora and half of Colonel Hanwu's Marine team. New Bisen and other colonies would take years to fully rebuild, but they had won. The Galactic Council officially recognized all human territorial claims. 3 species that had supported the Vraxians issued formal apologies. Thexva was arrested by his own people, who were desperate to distance themselves from his failed war. A month after the Battle of Raxus Prime, Admiral Hanna stood at a memorial on Earth. Thousands of names were carved into black stone, each one a person who had died defending humanity's right to exist as equals among the stars. She placed her hand on the wall, feeling the weight of every decision she had made. President Dahion stood beside her. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. Hanna was silent for a long moment. Ask me in 50 years, she finally said. Ask me when human children grow up without fear of being conquered. When colonists can build homes without wondering if someone will take them. When we sit at the council as equals, not as subordinates. She turned to look at him. We didn't start this war, but we finished it. Sometimes that's all you can do. Across the galaxy, other species looked at humanity differently now. Some with respect, some with fear, some with a mixture of both. But none of them would ever again make the mistake of thinking humans were weak.